Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The Call of the Ghost Walk.
I had always found our apartment building to be charming in a slightly eerie way. The vintage architecture and creaking floorboards gave it character, but recently, things had taken a turn for the bizarre. It started with whispers in the halls and rumors among the tenants. They claimed that the elevator sometimes stopped on a floor that didn't exist, between the 4th and 5th floors. I brushed it off as urban legend, something to spice up our otherwise mundane lives. But as I listened to my neighbors share their experiences, a chill ran down my spine. One evening, as I was heading home from work, I found myself in the lobby with a few other tenants. They were discussing the latest incident, how someone had seen an old woman in white at the non-existent floor when the elevator opened. She was just standing there, one tenant recounted, his voice trembling. It felt like she was looking right through me. I laughed nervously, trying to ease the tension, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the wind howling outside, mixing with the faint hum of the city below. I couldn't help but replay the stories in my mind, each one more chilling than the last. What if there really was something, or someone, on that floor? I pushed the thought aside, convincing myself it was just my imagination running wild. But the next evening, curiosity gnawed at me. I decided to take the elevator up to the 4th floor after work, half expecting it to stop at the ghost floor. My heart raced as the doors slid shut, the soft hum of the machinery drowning out my thoughts. I pressed the button for my floor, and to my surprise, the elevator jolted and then stopped abruptly between the floors. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thick and charged. The doors opened slowly, revealing darkness. The moment I stepped out, I felt an eerie chill seep into my bones. The air felt cold and stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but something compelled me to move forward. The elevator doors opened slowly, revealing a dimly lit corridor. The air was thick, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something that felt oddly wrong. My heart raced, pounding in my ears as I took a hesitant step forward. I couldn't believe I was actually doing this, but the stories I had heard tugged at my curiosity like a puppet on a string. I felt the cold floor beneath my feet as I stepped out of the elevator. The corridor stretched ahead, seemingly endless, with peeling wallpaper and flickering lights casting unsettling shadows. I swallowed hard, reminding myself that I was just being paranoid. It was just an old building. Yet, every instinct screamed at me to turn around and go back, but a strange pull urged me onward. As I moved deeper into the hallway, I noticed the door at the end, partially ajar. A weak light spilled out, illuminating the space around it just enough to make my heart race faster. It felt as though I were walking toward the unknown, and a sense of dread settled in my stomach. I paused for a moment, trying to gather my courage. What if someone was really there? What if this was all just a figment of my imagination? But then I remembered the stories, the old woman, the whispers, the missing tenants. Each thought added to my unease, but it also fanned the flames of my curiosity. With a deep breath, I pressed on, my feet carrying me toward the door that felt like a gateway to another world. I reached out, my hand trembling as I pushed the door open. It creaked ominously, revealing a dusty room filled with forgotten relics. As I stepped inside, I felt a chill wash over me, as if the room itself was alive and aware of my presence. I could barely make out the shapes of furniture covered in white sheets, as if they were ghosts of the past. Then, something caught my eye, a wall adorned with old photographs. I moved closer, my heart pounding as I studied the faces captured in time. They looked out at me, their expressions frozen in fear and despair. Among them, I noticed names written in faded ink, names that seemed eerily familiar. One of them was a tenant from my floor, a woman who had vanished just a few months ago. Panic gripped me as I stumbled back. I was not just in an abandoned room. I had stumbled into a graveyard of memories. A whisper echoed through the air, chilling me to the bone. "Help us," it murmured, a soft plea that sent shivers down my spine. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end as I realized I was not alone in this room. The atmosphere shifted, growing heavy with a sense of urgency and dread. I wanted to run, to escape back to the safety of my apartment, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. It was as if the photographs were reaching out to me, begging me to understand their stories, to remember them. Just as I turned to flee, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. My breath hitched in my throat as the footsteps echoed through the room, each sound sending a jolt of terror coursing through my body. It was as if the air had thickened around me, and I could feel a presence, something unseen hovering just behind me. I turned slowly, my heart racing, expecting to see someone standing there, but the room remained empty. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself, forcing my feet to move. I needed to escape this place, to get back to the safety of my apartment. But as I took a step toward the door, I felt a cold breeze whip around me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The photographs seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, as if the faces were watching me, pleading for attention. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, almost as if they were circling me. I spun around again, but still nothing. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The whispers started again, now more distinct, threading through the air like an eerie melody. "Help us!" It was a chorus of voices, each one laced with sorrow, pain, and fear. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart racing as the shadows danced in the dim light. I tried to recall the stories my neighbors told. What had they said about the ghost floor? Something about people who had disappeared, trapped between the worlds, waiting for someone to remember them. My stomach churned as the realization hit me. These were not just faces in photographs. They were people who had lived, who had loved, and now they were lost, calling out for help. In a panic, I rushed to the door, desperately pushing it open. The sound of my footsteps echoed loudly in the stillness, but just as I stepped back into the hallway, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The noise reverberated through the corridor, sending a shudder down my spine. I was trapped. I frantically tugged at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The air around me felt electric, charged with a tension I couldn't comprehend. My heart pounded against my chest as I turned to face the hallway. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, and I could hear the whispers growing louder, more frantic. "Help us! Help us!" Panic surged through me. I took a step back, and then another, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But as I glanced down the hallway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the far end, standing in the flickering light, was a figure, a silhouette of a woman, dressed in white, her face obscured by darkness. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The woman began to move toward me, her movements slow and deliberate. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, caught in the grip of fear. "Please," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was pleading to. The whispers seemed to intensify, drowning out my thoughts. "Please don't go," the figure called out softly, her voice a haunting echo that chilled me to the bone. "We need you to remember." In that moment, I understood. I wasn't just an observer. I was part of their story now. The weight of their anguish pressed down on me, and I knew that I had to find a way to help them, or risk becoming one of them. The figure drew closer, her white dress swirling around her as if caught in a breeze that I couldn't feel. My heart raced as I realized the weight of the moment. I was staring at a ghost, a soul trapped between the living and the dead. I wanted to scream, to run back through that door and never look back, but something deep inside me urged me to stay. I had to understand what she wanted. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "What happened to you?" She stopped just a few feet away, her face still shrouded in shadow. "I am one of many who came before you," she replied, her voice a soft, mournful melody. "We are the forgotten, the lost. You can help us, but you must choose to remember." "Remember what?" I pressed, my curiosity battling with my fear. "Us," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We lived here, we laughed, we cried, and then we vanished. No one remembers our names, our faces. We need someone to remember us, to acknowledge our existence, or we will fade completely." I felt a chill run through me. The photos, the faces, they were begging for recognition, for someone to know that they had lived. But was I really prepared to take on this burden? What if I couldn't help them? What if I became trapped like them? The whispers grew more frantic, filling the air around me with urgency. "Help us! Remember!" They echoed in my mind, a cacophony of despair. I could feel their emotions seeping into me. Fear, sadness, longing. I wanted to help, but the weight of their pain felt almost too much to bear. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I gasped, instinctively pulling away. The ghostly woman's eyes glinted in the dim light, and for a moment, I thought I could see the depths of her sorrow. "You're scared," she said gently, "but you are here for a reason. You have the power to set us free." In that moment, something shifted within me. I realized that I could no longer ignore their suffering. I thought of my own life, the people I loved, and how easily one could vanish without a trace. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger now. "I will remember you. I will tell your stories." As those words left my lips, the room around me began to change. The shadows deepened, swirling like a tempest as if my promise had awakened something powerful. The ghostly woman stepped closer, her features becoming clearer. I could see her eyes now, filled with gratitude and something else, something darker. But then, as if sensing my resolve, the shadows surged forward, and I felt the temperature drop. The walls seemed to close in on me, the whispers turning from pleading to furious. "No, you can't leave. You can't forget." I stumbled back, panic clawing at my throat. The ghostly woman's expression shifted, her once calm demeanor now twisted with desperation. "You must remember, or you'll be lost too." The pressure in the room grew unbearable. I turned, racing back toward the door, heart pounding as the whispers turned into wails of anguish. I flung myself against the door, pushing with all my might, and just as I thought I wouldn't be able to escape, the door swung open, spilling me into the hallway. I gasped for breath, stumbling backward, heart racing. But as I glanced back into the room, I saw the ghostly woman standing there, her face a mask of sorrow. "Remember us," she cried, her voice echoing as the door slammed shut between us. The corridor felt like a prison, the shadows closing in around me. I was back in the hallway, but I could still hear their cries, still feel their pain. I had made a choice, but it came with consequences. As I backed away from the door, I knew that the battle was just beginning. I wasn't free yet. My heart raced as I stumbled back into the hallway, the echoes of the ghostly woman's voice still reverberating in my mind. "Remember us." Her words were now etched into my thoughts, a chilling reminder of the weight I had just taken on. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, trying to shake off the dread that clung to me like a second skin. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the reality of what had just happened. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. I could still hear the whispers of the forgotten, a low hum that filled the silence, taunting me, reminding me of the promise I made. I had to remember, but how? I began to walk, each step heavy with the burden of what I had witnessed. My mind raced with thoughts of the photographs, the faces of the missing. I needed to find out who they were, to give them the recognition they craved. I turned back toward the elevator, hesitating for a moment as I stared at the door. What if it led me back to that haunted room? What if I found myself trapped again? But I couldn't let fear hold me back. I had a purpose now, and I had to see it through. I pressed the button for the elevator, my pulse quickening as I waited. The doors slid open with an eerie creak, and I stepped inside. The silence was deafening, and I shuddered as I recalled the ghost's presence beside me, the cold hand that brushed my arm. As the elevator began its descent, I glanced at the panel. The lights flickered ominously, and I braced myself as it stopped suddenly between floors. The lights dimmed, and the air thickened around me. "Not again," I muttered, fear gripping my chest. But then, something unexpected happened. The panel flickered back to life, and I saw it, a new button illuminated, glowing with a strange energy. It was marked with a symbol I didn't recognize, and instinctively, I knew I had to press it. My fingers trembled as I reached out, and before I could think twice, I pressed the button. The elevator lurched, and I felt a jolt of energy surge through me as it started moving again. When the doors finally opened, I was met with a different hallway, a place that felt both familiar and foreign. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, just like the ones I had seen before. But these were alive, bursting with color and vibrancy, showcasing moments of joy and laughter. I stepped out into the corridor, feeling a pull toward the first photograph on the wall. It depicted a woman in a summer dress, smiling brightly at the camera. Beneath it, a name was scrawled in elegant handwriting, Emma Carter. I blinked, feeling a rush of emotion as the whispers began to fill my ears again, this time softer, like a lullaby. "Remember," they urged. "Remember us." One by one, I moved down the hall, absorbing each photograph, each name, a history of lives that once thrived in this building. I felt a connection with them, as if their stories were intertwining with mine. My heart ached with every name I read, each life that had been extinguished too soon. As I reached the end of the hallway, I found myself standing in front of a door, just like the one I had fled from before. But this time, I felt no fear. I understood now. I needed to face the darkness, to confront what lay beyond that door. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was empty, save for the same photographs lining the walls. But this time, it felt different. I felt their presence, like a warm embrace welcoming me home. "Thank you for remembering," a voice whispered, and I turned to see the ghostly woman standing before me, her form shimmering softly in the light. "You've given us hope." I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes as I understood the weight of what I had done. I had not just remembered, I had become their voice. As the whispers of the past faded into a peaceful silence, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. In that moment, I knew I had changed. I wasn't just a passerby in their story anymore. I was now part of their legacy. I would carry their memories with me, ensuring they would never be forgotten. And perhaps in time, I would find a way to help others remember, too.
Invisible passenger.
I was bone-tired by the time I got back to my building that night. The kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones and makes every step feel heavier. It had been one of those days that just refused to end, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed and let sleep take me. As I hit the elevator button and waited, the lobby was eerily quiet, just the faint hum of the lights overhead. When the elevator doors finally slid open, I stepped inside, grateful to find it empty. I leaned against the wall and hit the button for my floor, closing my eyes for a second, savoring the stillness. But just as the doors started to close, they stopped, then slid open again, like they were waiting for someone. I blinked, confused. There was no one there, and no one had entered. The hallway outside was as empty as when I'd stepped in. "Come on," I muttered, reaching out and pressing the button again. The doors finally slid shut, but as they did, I noticed something strange on the control panel. Another floor button was lit. I frowned. I hadn't pressed it. My building was small, and I knew most of the residents by sight, at least. It was unusual for anyone to be around this late, especially since the floor selected was the 6th, a storage floor that was almost never used. Shrugging it off, I tried to convince myself I'd somehow bumped the button by mistake. The elevator began its slow, steady climb, and I let my mind drift, thinking about how good it was going to feel to finally be home. But as we passed the 3rd floor, a prickling sensation crept up my neck. It felt like someone was watching me. I glanced around, but of course, I was alone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. The space felt somehow smaller, like it was filled with an invisible weight, pressing in on me from all sides. When the elevator dinged and stopped at the 6th floor, my heart rate quickened. The doors opened, and I found myself staring out at the dim, silent hallway. No one got on. There was no movement, no sound. Just darkness stretching down the corridor, shadows swallowing every detail. Something told me to look away, to hit the button to close the doors and get out of there as fast as possible. But I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the hallway, as if something just out of sight was standing there, watching me, waiting. And then, I could have sworn, I heard it. A faint rustle, like footsteps shifting on the carpet just beyond my view. I jabbed at the close door button, my hands shaky. The doors slid shut, and I released a shaky breath, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just a weird, empty hallway on a floor no one ever used. As the elevator resumed its climb, I couldn't help but feel like I hadn't left that presence behind. It felt closer now, filling the space beside me, pressing against my shoulder with an icy, suffocating weight. It was irrational, I told myself. Ridiculous. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As the elevator continued its ascent, the air inside grew thicker, almost suffocating. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out the soft whir of the machinery. I focused on the glowing panel above the doors, counting the lights as they blinked by. 2nd floor. I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe I was just tired or overworked. But when the elevator dinged again, I felt a chill sweep through me. The doors opened to the second floor, revealing another empty hallway. I glanced out, half expecting to see someone waiting, but nothing. Just shadows lingering in the corners, and an unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. "Get a grip, Nathan," I whispered to myself. "It's just an elevator. You're fine." I pressed the button for my floor once more, the 5th floor, trying to ignore the strange feeling that someone was standing right next to me. But then I heard it again. That faint rustling sound, a whisper of movement that seemed to brush against my ear. I turned sharply, half expecting to see someone there, but again, the elevator remained empty. I was alone, yet I could feel a presence, something hovering just out of sight, teasing at the edges of my awareness. The elevator moved on, and as we reached the 3rd floor, I could have sworn I felt a breath on my neck. My heart raced, and I fought the urge to scream. I turned around to face the doors, my palms sweating against the cool metal railing. I was being ridiculous. There was no one else in here, just me. When the elevator stopped again, I expected to see my floor, but instead, it opened onto the 4th. The door slid open, and the familiar dim light spilled in, but the emptiness felt more palpable this time, as if the shadows had grown more pronounced, watching me with an unyielding intensity. I hesitated, caught in a battle between the comfort of familiarity and the growing dread that churned in my stomach. "It's just the 4th floor," I muttered. "Nothing to worry about." But as I stepped closer to the door, I felt the temperature drop sharply. A cold gust swept through the elevator, sending shivers down my spine. The door remained open for an uncomfortably long time, and I was about to step out when I felt it. A whisper, soft but clear, right next to my ear. "Nathan." My blood ran cold. How did it know my name? Panic surged within me, and I lunged for the closed door button, pressing it frantically. The doors shut just as the chill reached a bone-deep level, and I could feel the air thickening around me. The elevator began to move again, but my heart pounded louder than ever. "Calm down," I told myself, trying to catch my breath. I needed to focus. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the elevator was malfunctioning, or perhaps someone was playing a sick prank. Yet, deep down, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was with me wasn't going to let me go that easily. The elevator stopped at the 5th floor, my floor, and the doors opened once more. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As I stepped out, the sense of something brushing past me made me stumble. I quickly turned, but once again, I was alone. The hallway stretched out before me, familiar yet foreboding. I took a few hesitant steps toward my apartment, every instinct screaming for me to run, but I forced myself to move slowly. That's when I heard it again, the soft whisper, clearer now, and I felt the cold breath against my cheek. "Stay with me." A jolt of terror shot through me, and I bolted toward my door, fumbling with my keys as I tried to unlock it. The cold presence loomed behind me, and as I finally turned the key, I felt fingers graze my shoulder. In that instant, I knew I wasn't alone. I stumbled through the door, slamming it shut behind me with a frantic thud that echoed in the silence of my apartment. My heart raced as I leaned against the door, pressing my back against the cool wood, desperately trying to catch my breath. I felt like I had just escaped from something I couldn't see, something that had been waiting for me. The shadows in my living room loomed large, stretching out from the corners, dancing ominously in the light of the single overhead bulb. I turned to lock the door, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the deadbolt. The sound of the lock clicking into place was a small comfort, but the cold dread still clung to me like a wet blanket. I glanced around the room, searching for any signs of intrusion. My apartment was just how I'd left it. Nothing seemed amiss, yet every creak of the building felt amplified, every little noise turned sinister. I tried to convince myself it was just the after effects of a long day and an overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew that feeling wouldn't fade easily. I paced the living room, my mind racing. I needed to calm down. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking as I took a long sip, but even that did little to soothe my nerves. The unsettling presence lingered, the whisper still echoing in my mind. "Stay with me." What did it want? I couldn't help but think back to the elevator, to that strange selection on the panel. Had someone really gotten on without my noticing? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place, but none of it made any sense. I decided to distract myself. I sank onto the couch and turned on the TV, hoping the flickering light and noise would drown out my anxiety. But my mind was too alert, too hyper-focused on the shadows creeping in the corners of my vision. I glanced at my phone. No missed calls or texts, just the lingering digital silence that felt almost oppressive. It wasn't long before the comforting hum of the TV turned into background noise, and the unease returned with a vengeance. I could feel the weight of the air shifting around me, and suddenly I was hyper-aware of the sounds in my apartment. The ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and, beneath it all, a whispering sound, almost like breathing. I stood up, heart pounding, and peered around the room. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The only answer was the silence that seemed to swallow me whole. I cursed under my breath, angry at myself for letting my imagination run wild. I had to shake this off. I decided to take a shower, thinking the hot water would help calm my nerves. I stepped into the bathroom, letting the steam envelop me, trying to wash away the fear clinging to my skin. As the water cascaded down, I found some solace, the rhythmic sound a gentle reminder that I was still here, still alive. But just as I was starting to relax, I heard it again, a soft rustle, like fabric brushing against itself. My heart dropped. I peered out from behind the shower curtain, droplets glistening on my skin, the reality of my vulnerability washing over me. The bathroom door stood ajar, shadows pooling in the hallway. "Nathan," the whisper echoed again, barely more than a breath, and I froze, panic flooding my veins. Was this a joke? Was someone really in my apartment? I quickly shut off the water, the abrupt silence amplifying every noise around me. I could hear my heart thundering in my chest, drowning out all rational thought. I grabbed a towel, wrapping it around me as I tiptoed toward the door, my mind racing with possibilities. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking as I prepared to confront whatever waited for me beyond the threshold. I hesitated, caught between my desire to escape and the instinct to confront this unknown threat. Taking a deep breath, I flung the door open, ready to face whatever was there. But there was nothing, just the quiet of my empty apartment, shadows casting eerie shapes on the walls. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just out of sight. And then, as if in response to my fear, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before they sputtered back to life. "Stay with me," the whisper came again, clearer this time, resonating in my chest, a chilling reminder that the invisible presence was still very much with me. The whisper wrapped around me like a cold fog, thickening the air with dread. My heart raced as I stepped back into the bathroom, retreating into the steam and shadows, desperately trying to process what was happening. I felt exposed and vulnerable, like a mouse cornered by an unseen predator. "Stay with me," echoed in my mind, taunting me. It was a simple phrase, yet it sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. In a moment of sheer panic, I reached for my phone, but then I remembered, no signal in here. The thought of being cut off from the outside world sent a wave of nausea through me. I had to get out of the bathroom, had to get somewhere safe. I pushed aside the fog of fear and forced myself to take a step back into the hallway. As I emerged, the light flickered again, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and contort around me. I could feel the presence growing stronger, almost suffocating in its intensity. My breath quickened, and I could hear the soft rustling sound again, like something shifting just out of sight. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. I was met with silence, but the oppressive feeling of being watched only deepened. I hurriedly made my way to the living room, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, convinced that something would emerge from the darkness. I grabbed my jacket off the couch, clutching it tightly around me as I scanned the apartment for any escape. I considered calling for help, but who would I even call? My neighbors? The thought seemed absurd. I felt so isolated, trapped in my own home with a presence I couldn't see. As I stood there, frozen in fear, I heard it again, the soft whispering, now accompanied by the sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like someone was pacing just out of my line of sight. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, the noise growing louder as if it were coming closer. My instincts kicked in, and I bolted for the front door. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers slipping as panic coursed through me. I could hear the footsteps nearing, the whispering morphing into low, unintelligible murmurs that sent chills racing down my spine. "Please, just leave me alone," I shouted into the emptiness, my voice cracking under the weight of terror. But my plea was met with silence, and I could feel the weight of the air shift again, like something was moving just beyond my reach. I finally managed to twist the deadbolt, and the door creaked open. I peered out into the dimly lit hallway, half expecting to see something waiting there, ready to pounce. But it was empty. The silence felt like a trap, and I was torn between the safety of my apartment and the unknown outside. Gathering what little courage I had left, I stepped out into the hallway, closing the door tightly behind me. I had to escape this nightmare, had to find someone who could help. As I moved down the corridor, the air felt charged, thick with an energy I couldn't comprehend. I reached the stairwell, hoping the noise of my footsteps would drown out the whispering that still echoed in my ears. But the moment I stepped inside, the lights flickered once more, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged within me, and I fumbled for the railing, clinging to it as I felt the air shift again. Something was there, lingering in the shadows. "Stay with me," the voice came again, clearer than before, like a chilling invitation that made my skin crawl. "Go away," I shouted, my voice breaking, but there was no response. I took a deep breath and began to descend the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The silence was oppressive, and with every creak of the steps beneath me, I felt the presence draw closer, like a predator stalking its prey. As I reached the ground floor, I burst through the door, desperate for the safety of the outside world. But instead of the familiar lobby, I was met with an unexpected sight. The building's entrance was eerily dark, the usual lights flickering ominously above, casting long shadows across the floor. I hesitated, looking back toward the stairs, the feeling of being followed still heavy in the air. Then I heard it again, a soft rustle, like footsteps approaching from behind. I didn't think, I just ran toward the door, my heart racing as I pulled on the handle. But it wouldn't budge. Panic gripped me as I rattled it, my breath coming in frantic gasps. I was trapped. I spun around, desperate, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the top of the stairs, shrouded in darkness. The air froze around me, and I knew, without a doubt, that whatever I had felt in that elevator had followed me home. The figure at the top of the stairs remained motionless, just a silhouette cloaked in darkness, its presence suffocating. My heart raced, a deafening drum in my ears, drowning out any rational thought. I was rooted to the spot, terror paralyzing me as I faced this unseen menace. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice shaky and desperate. The air felt charged, heavy with an energy that made my skin prickle. But there was no answer, just the oppressive silence that enveloped the lobby like a thick fog. Then, slowly, the figure began to move, gliding down the steps with an unnatural grace that sent chills coursing through my veins. Each step it took echoed in the silence, and I instinctively took a step back, searching for an escape, but the door remained locked tight behind me. "Stay with me," the whisper came again, more insistent now, like a command that gripped me with fear. I could feel it wrapping around my throat, squeezing tighter as the figure descended closer. I wanted to bolt, wanted to run, but my body felt heavy, as if the very air was weighing me down. Just as it reached the bottom step, the flickering lights above us sputtered violently, illuminating the figure for the briefest moment. My breath hitched in my throat as I caught a glimpse of its face, or what should have been a face. It was a void, a dark, featureless mass that seemed to absorb the light around it. I was looking into the abyss, and it was looking back. In that instant, adrenaline surged through me, breaking the paralysis. I turned and slammed my shoulder against the door, desperation fueling my strength. The wood rattled under the force, and for a moment I thought it would give. But it held firm. The figure was closer now, and the whisper became louder, more defined. "Stay with me," it beckoned, the voice a haunting echo that clawed at my sanity. I could feel it reaching for me, an unseen hand brushing against my arm, cold and clammy, sending waves of revulsion rippling through me. With a final, frantic push, I rammed my shoulder against the door one last time, and to my relief, it finally swung open. I stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath, the cool air hitting me like a wave of salvation. I turned back, half expecting to see the figure looming behind me, but the lobby was empty. I took a few steps away from the building, not daring to look back, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might burst. I could still hear the whisper in my head, echoing in the silence. "Stay with me." I fumbled for my phone, desperately trying to call someone, anyone. My fingers shook as I dialed my friend's number, praying it would connect. But there was no signal. The dread crept back in, slithering through my veins like poison. I needed to get away from here, away from this nightmare that had invaded my life. I turned and walked briskly toward the street, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. I was almost free when I felt it again, a chill down my spine, like someone was standing right behind me. I glanced back, but the street was empty, the shadows dancing in the flickering streetlights. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was lurking just beyond the edge of the light, waiting. As I reached the corner, I heard a car approaching. I waved my arms, desperate for help, and the driver slowed down, a look of concern on their face. I rushed over, my voice shaky as I explained everything. They nodded, looking skeptical but clearly alarmed by my state. "Just get in," they said, and I didn't hesitate. I climbed into the passenger seat, relief flooding through me as I closed the door. But as we drove away, the unsettling whisper followed me, lingering in the back of my mind. "Stay with me." No matter how far I went, I felt it clinging to my thoughts, a reminder that some things cannot be escaped. As the lights of the city blurred past us, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that dark figure watching me from the shadows. But there was nothing, just the emptiness of the night, stretching out like a dark void. Yet even with that emptiness, I knew I would never feel truly safe again. The invisible passenger was a part of me now, a reminder that fear can manifest in the most unexpected places. And as I sat there, shivering in the warmth of the car, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever be free from its haunting call.
The locked elevator.
It was one of those late nights at the office, the kind where everyone is more than ready to leave, but somehow a little part of you feels uneasy. We were the last ones out. Me, Julia, Mark, Sarah, and Ethan, all crammed into the elevator together, joking about how we'd barely made it through the week. There was this tired, nervous energy buzzing among us, the kind you only get when it's so late you can hardly think straight. The doors slid shut, and I pressed the button for the lobby. Nothing unusual at first, just the low hum of the elevator. But as we started to descend, the lights flickered. Once, twice. We all froze, just for a second, our laughter fading. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on the old building, but then, suddenly, the elevator jolted to a stop mid-floor. Just like that, we were trapped. We all stared at each other in silence. I could see the realization sinking in as we all reached for our phones, expecting to call someone for help. But no signal. Ethan pressed the emergency call button on the elevator panel, but no sound came from it. It was dead, too. "Great," Mark muttered, leaning back against the wall with a sigh. "Just our luck." We laughed it off at first, joking about how it felt like the start of some cheesy horror movie. But deep down, I could feel this tightness growing in my chest. Something felt off, more than just being stuck in a metal box with my coworkers. I couldn't quite place it, but it was like the air was getting thicker, pressing down on us, making it hard to breathe. After a few minutes, the silence set in. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if we'd be here all night. That's when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like someone breathing just behind me. I turned, expecting one of the others, maybe Julia, to be playing a prank. But she was on the other side of the elevator, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. Did anyone else hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Julia nodded slowly, her face pale. "I thought someone was right behind me." The others looked at each other uneasily, and I could see it in their eyes. They'd heard it too. Mark shook his head, like he was trying to brush it off. "Come on, it's just the building settling, or something," he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. But then Julia flinched, her hand darting to her shoulder. Her face went even whiter. "Something touched me. I swear, it felt like a hand." Ethan chuckled nervously. "It's just your imagination, Julia. We're all a bit jumpy." But I knew what I'd felt. That chill creeping up my spine, like someone was watching us, someone, or something, that shouldn't be there. I pressed myself against the wall, and so did everyone else, each of us trying to stay as far from the middle as possible. We waited in tense silence, our backs pressed against the walls of the elevator, every one of us listening, trying to catch any hint of noise. But the longer we stood there, the more the silence became its own kind of torture. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest, and judging by the way the others kept darting their eyes around, I wasn't the only one. Then, out of nowhere, there it was again, that faint whisper. This time, it was louder, almost like a soft voice echoing off the elevator walls, but it was too quiet to make out any words. It was just there, seeping into the air, chilling us to the bone. Okay, seriously, did anyone else hear that? Sarah's voice cracked as she whispered, clutching her arms tightly. We all nodded, none of us daring to speak. I caught a glimpse of Julia, wide-eyed and shaking. I could almost feel her fear, matching my own, twisting tighter and tighter in my gut. Mark, trying to keep his cool, took a shaky breath. "All right, maybe it's just some kind of malfunction," he mumbled. But his voice was unsteady, and I could tell he didn't believe his own words. None of us did. Whatever was happening, it didn't feel like just a malfunction. Then, just as quickly as the whispering had started, something else began. A faint tap-tap-tap sound, almost rhythmic, like footsteps, but somehow off. It echoed through the cramped space, coming from above us. "Oh God, what is that?" Julia's voice was barely a whisper. The tapping got louder, closer, like it was right above our heads, pacing. Each step felt heavier, angrier. We looked up, almost in unison, and I swear I could feel something staring back down, waiting, watching. The footsteps stopped abruptly. For a few heart-stopping moments, there was nothing but silence. And then, we felt it, a cold, almost icy sensation spreading through the elevator. I shivered, the air somehow feeling dense, pressing down on us from all sides. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. Just a shadow, a flicker in the dim light. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just 4 frightened faces staring back at me. Okay, I can't take this," Ethan said, his voice shaking as he backed up, slamming his hand against the emergency button again. "Come on, someone has to hear us. Someone has to know we're trapped in here." The button didn't respond. The red emergency light just stared back at us, as lifeless as the walls around us. And then, without warning, the lights flickered again. This time, it wasn't just a brief flash. The whole elevator went dark, plunging us into pitch-black silence. We were completely blind, just our breathing filling the darkness. I reached out instinctively, my hands grasping at nothing but empty air. Then, a scream. High-pitched, terrified, Julia's voice. "Julia!" I shouted, my hands frantically feeling through the dark, trying to find her, to make sure she was still there. But all I found was empty space. The lights flickered back on, harsh and sudden, illuminating the terrified faces of Mark, Sarah, and Ethan. But Julia was gone. I stared at the empty space where she'd been standing, my heart racing so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. Just seconds ago, she was right there, clutching her bag, practically glued to the wall beside me. And now, nothing. Just silence, and the faint smell of something metallic. "What the hell?" Mark's voice trembled. He kept glancing from the elevator doors to the ceiling, like he expected Julia to just appear out of nowhere. Where did she go? She was right here. We all knew there was no way out of this box. No doors had opened, no panels had shifted, and yet Julia was gone. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. We hadn't even heard the slightest sound after her scream, just silence, as if she'd vanished into thin air. Maybe she somehow slipped out when the lights went off, Sarah stammered, though I could see in her eyes she didn't believe it. None of us did. Ethan was pressing the emergency button over and over, his hand shaking. Come on, come on. Somebody has to hear us. We're trapped in here and something's happening to us. But the button stayed dead. We were completely alone, sealed off from the world, with no way to call for help. I tried to keep calm, to hold on to some sense of reality, but the feeling that had been creeping over me, that chilling, oppressive presence, was stronger now, filling the elevator like a thick, invisible fog. It felt like it was alive, watching us, feeding off our fear. Then, as if to confirm that feeling, I felt something brush my arm. Cold, wet, like a hand that wasn't human. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and I whipped around to find nothing. Just my colleagues, wide-eyed, just as lost and terrified as I was. What was that? Sarah whispered, her face pale as she looked around frantically. Did anyone else feel that? Ethan nodded, his eyes darting around. Yeah, it felt like something was touching my shoulder. Something cold. The lights flickered again, dimming, casting long, distorted shadows across our faces. And in the dimness, for just a split second, I thought I saw a figure. A tall, shadowy outline standing at the back of the elevator. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the faintest impression burned into my vision. We all backed away, pressing ourselves against the walls as if we could somehow escape that darkness in the middle. My mind was racing, every logical explanation slipping through my fingers, leaving only raw, unfiltered fear. Mark was breathing heavily, his voice a harsh whisper. This isn't right. This isn't just us being trapped. Something else is in here with us. Another silence settled over us, tense and suffocating. And then, that dreadful tapping sound began again. Slow, deliberate, like footsteps circling us, pacing just outside our reach. It echoed through the walls, then faded into a chilling whisper. This time, it was my name. The whispering, it was my name. Soft, drawn out, like a voice just on the edge of hearing. It sent a chill down my spine, rooting me to the spot. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that I was just imagining things in the haze of panic. But then I saw it in their faces. Mark, Sarah, Ethan, they'd heard it, too. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. Did it just say your name? I could only nod, my mouth dry, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. Just when I thought I'd hit my limit for fear, it whispered again, this time louder. My name, unmistakable, as if something was right next to me, breathing into my ear. I can't do this, Ethan muttered, his voice breaking as he banged his fist against the elevator doors. Let us out. Somebody, please. His voice echoed in the tight space, and for a second, I almost thought I heard an answer. A low, mocking laugh, deep and guttural, like it was coming from the walls themselves. My skin prickled, and the temperature dropped again, colder this time, a damp chill that clung to us like fog. And then, just like that, the lights flickered again. But this time, they didn't come back on completely. The elevator was bathed in a dim, sickly yellow glow, just bright enough to cast strange, twisted shadows across the walls. Shadows that seemed to shift and crawl, forming strange shapes, shapes that didn't belong to us. Do you see that? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his gaze fixed on the shadows. Those aren't our shadows. It was true. The shadows were wrong, like they were moving on their own, stretching and bending, twisting into forms that looked like figures with long, grasping arms, reaching toward us. I couldn't look away, paralyzed by the grotesque shapes. They seemed to swell and pulse, growing darker, more solid. Suddenly, one of them broke free. A shadow arm, stretching out from the wall, reaching straight toward me. I stumbled back, slamming against the elevator wall, my breathing coming in short, frantic gasps. I could feel it closing in, its cold, empty fingers brushing my arm, like it was pulling me in. Then, just as I thought it would drag me into the wall, the shadows shifted. A blinding flash of darkness swept across the elevator, and in that split second, I saw Julia. She was standing in the far corner, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. But something was wrong. Her eyes, they looked hollow, empty, like she was staring straight through me. Her mouth moved, forming words, but no sound came out. "Julia," I whispered, barely daring to believe it. She raised her hand slowly, pointing at me with one shaking finger, her mouth moving in that silent scream. And then, before I could even blink, she was gone. The shadows swallowed her whole, leaving nothing but that cold emptiness. I pressed my back against the wall, fighting the urge to scream. My mind was racing, desperate to understand, but all I could feel was that icy grip of dread tightening around me. What's happening to us?" Sarah whimpered, tears streaming down her face. Mark shook his head, eyes wide with terror. "I don't know. But whatever this is, it doesn't want us to leave." And in that moment, I realized something even more horrifying. Whatever was in here with us, it was choosing us. One by one. I could barely breathe. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every second, the air thick with the scent of something decayed, something wrong. Sarah was sobbing softly, her face buried in her hands, while Mark and Ethan stared at the elevator doors, eyes wide with that same realization sinking into each of us. No one was coming to save us. And whatever was here, it wasn't finished. A deep, suffocating silence fell, so dense that even the faintest rustle of clothing seemed deafening. I could feel the thing in the elevator with us, its presence cold and pressing, like it was coiling around each of us, sizing us up. The lights dimmed again, and I could see the flickering shadow figures in the corners, gathering, waiting. Then, without warning, Ethan let out a strangled gasp, clutching his throat as if invisible hands were tightening around it. His face turned pale, his eyes wide with terror as he backed up, pressing against the elevator wall, desperately trying to breathe. "Ethan!" Sarah screamed, reaching out for him. But he didn't even seem to see her. He just kept clawing at his throat, his gaze locked on something none of us could see. His eyes were bulging, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, Ethan froze. He dropped his hands, and for a heartbeat he was still. But something was off. His head tilted to the side, and he looked at me, a twisted smile creeping onto his face. "Join us," he whispered, his voice a low, unnatural rasp. My blood ran cold as I backed away, my body trembling. Ethan wasn't himself. His eyes were empty, void of the warmth and fear I'd seen in them just moments before. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me, his movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me back. We have to get out of here," he muttered, his voice shaking. "I don't know how, but we have to try." Ethan's smile twisted even more, and he tilted his head, studying us with those blank, lifeless eyes. Then, in a blink, the lights went out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. I could feel Mark gripping my arm tightly, his hand shaking as we waited, breathless, in the silence. And then, a voice. Low, soft, almost gentle, echoing through the darkness. "You can't leave. This is where you belong." The lights flickered on again, just enough for us to see Ethan, or what was left of him. He stood there, frozen, his face blank and lifeless. And then, before our eyes, he dissolved into the shadows, like he was being swallowed whole. 1 second he was there, and the next, he was gone. Just gone. A wave of terror washed over me as I realized we were down to 3. I looked at Sarah and Mark, their faces pale, their eyes wide with dread. We're not getting out, are we?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that somehow we'd survive this. But I couldn't lie. Not anymore. The shadows around us grew thicker, darker, forming shapes, twisted faces that seemed to leer at us, mocking us. I could feel something cold brush against my skin, hear the faintest whisper in my ear. And then Mark was gone. I hadn't even seen him disappear. 1 second he was standing beside me, and the next, just empty space. It was just Sarah and me now, standing in the middle of the elevator, surrounded by shadows, by the faces of our lost colleagues, each one staring, waiting, beckoning us to join them. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, filling my head, pressing in from all sides. I felt like I was drowning in it, the words blurring together, a cold, endless chant. "Stay with us. Forever." I turned to Sarah, but she was already fading, her eyes glassy, her face slack as she melted into the darkness. I tried to reach for her, to hold on to something, anything, but my hands found only empty air. And then I was alone. The shadows closed in around me, their whispers growing louder, their cold, unseen hands pulling me down, down, deeper into the darkness. My vision blurred, the world spinning, and I felt myself slipping away, becoming part of the shadows, of the cold, endless void. The last thing I heard was my own scream, echoing in the empty elevator, a desperate, fading plea lost in the darkness. And then, silence.